Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News, and we're going racing once again later this week in Italy for the Imola Grand Prix, but Red Bull, after 2 DNFs in 3 races for Max Verstappen, believe they have further tracked down the cause of some of his issues, despite the minimal amount of porpoising the Red Bull experiences that may be causing the issues with his car at the Australian Grand Prix. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Of course, this week is a sprint race week. That's a big deal. This season actually a fair few changes from last season's sprint race. Of course, I believe last year only the top 3 drivers got any points as a result. This year, a very different story, and well, it's honestly, some significant changes. 3 sprint races this season, so basically the way it works this time is instead of having FP1, FP2, FP3 on the Friday, Saturday, and then having the qualification on the Saturday for the race on Sunday, quali is instead on Friday, the sprint race on Saturday, and then that determines the order for the start on the race for Sunday, the proper race. It's a sprint race effectively 100 kilometers, much shorter than the actual race distance, but I'm still, I guess, technically a race effectively. Magnussen, of course, now giving the fact that 8 teams or 8 drivers get points for the championship as a result of the sprint race, which was not the case before. He's going to go all out with greater sprint incentives, right? So there's good incentives for the drivers to actually do really well in the sprint race, try and get into top 8 and above, even if the kind of, middle of the back market teams. If you can get there, you actually get some championship points as a result. So lots of implications here, honestly. And as I say, now 8 drivers get points, but the way it works now is P1 gets 8 points, P2 gets 7 points, all the way down to 1 for the 8th place driver. So that's basically what's changing this year. This is, as they describe it here on the F1 website, a much more lucrative 8 points. So 8 points are a pretty big deal. Do you win the sprint race, you get 8 points towards your championship. Second place gets 7 points. So, obviously an opportunity, I guess, for Charles Leclerc to extend that advantage. Also means there's kind of more pressure on qualifying, right, to get a good situation for the sprint race. You can get more points on the board. So, definitely interesting how this one will develop over the weekends. Now, the other part of this actually is that they changed for some reason, kind of confusingly, that the pole position is now not going to be awarded to the driver that wins the sprint race, but rather the driver that actually qualifies fastest on the Friday. So P1 in the race, as in who gets the pole position for the actual race itself, will be determined, of course, by the winner of the sprint race, but they won't go necessarily down as the pole position holder for the weekend, right? So when you look back on the weekend, who got pole, who won the race, they're actually awarding the accolade of pole position to the driver that qualifies first on Friday, not necessarily who wins the sprint. So let's say Valtteri Bottas is on pole after qualifying, but then Charles Leclerc wins the sprint race. Obviously Charles Leclerc gets pole position for the race itself, but after the weekend is concluded, they will consider Valtteri Bottas to have the pole position accolade. So it's a bit of a strange one. That's effectively what's going on, but the sprint race does, of course, determine the order for the official race on the Sunday. That's how it's going. Now, of course, this weekend could be a pretty spicy one if the weather complies. Now, seemingly, this was the forecast about 24 hours and a bit ago, that it was going to rain all weekend, so the rain tyres might have to be getting at the ready. Seemingly now, the forecast has changed, so that only on Friday it's meant to rain, and on Saturday, Sunday it should be okay, and apparently Sunday is meant to be a really nice day. So of course rain, it does spice things up somewhat, but for qualifying, it may actually be raining significantly. That at least is the current forecast, and if that is the case, then it makes things kind of spicy in terms of who actually gets the accolade of pole position, I suppose, depending on how things go, of course. Let's discuss Red Bull then. So of course, lots of teams discussing, do they actually want to bring an upgrade to this race? Because especially if it is raining on Friday, and you've only got 1 practice session in FP1, then straight into qualifying, don't have all that much opportunity to test some new things out this weekend. So, maybe a lot of the team's going to delay that stuff. Of course, Ferrari, their idea is kind of, not really to change all that much early on, keep the upgrades rather minimal, at what they believe they can be very confident in working, because of course, cost cap is an implication as well, and, the car obviously is the quickest right now, so they don't want to make any mistakes. Of course, Red Bull need to close the gap as soon as they possibly can, right, especially with the sprint race points on offer, right, that's going to be potentially even larger advantage for Charles Leclerc at the top if, I'm pretty sure even if he DNFs this race, he'll still be on top of the championship until at least the 8th of May. So, lots of more buffer really for Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. But of course, last time out in Australia, that was really the dagger in the season so far for the Red Bull, especially, of course, Max Verstappen, who, 2 retirements from the first 3 races. The Australian one as well seemed like a different issue because Perez didn't have the issue that Verstappen did, as of course in Bahrain, when both cars pulled up with a fuel pump issue, I believe was the discussion at the time. Now, seemingly, the engine is okay. So, Helmut Marko reckons from the Red Bull side, Max Verstappen's engine is okay, no problem at all on the engine front. Of course, we've seen many issues for the new, I guess Honda still, but Red Bull powertrain powered cars. The Red Bulls and the Alfa Tauris both had many kind of powertrain issues so far this year. Helmut Marko says the engine is fine. It's the fuel kind of pump system, the fuel tank, whatever, that's causing the problems with the car. Now, this I thought was particularly interesting. That porpoising is apparently the cause of their failure in Australia, at least for Max Verstappen. So as Helmut Marko describes, the problem was not in the engine itself, but in the fuel line, which burst under high pressure. We think that has to do with the problem of the porpoising that they had. So look, if you look at the Red Bull, it's much more stable on the straight than the Ferrari even, or the Mercedes most certainly, right? Like if you watch the Red Bull, it doesn't really look like it bounces around at all on the straight like the other cars do. The Merc and the Ferrari, of course, arguably being the most egregious example, but seemingly Ferrari could get away with running a lower ride height and could actually still run the car very quick. But it wasn't ideal, and I'm sure they want to fix their porpoising, right? Because if you're, of course, Charles Leclerc or Carlos Sainz in the car, it makes it harder to judge braking, even if it's not actually affecting your performance like it seems to be for the Mercedes. But the Red Bull still does porpoise to a degree. It's just much less noticeable than on those other cars. But when you look at kind of the onboard and you can see the driver's head, his helmet bouncing up and down, there is still a slight bit of porpoising in the Red Bull. And apparently even that level of porpoising, which is probably maybe not necessarily an inevitability, but if you want to run your car ride height low, it's probably something that's going to happen. Like in Red Bull, I'm pretty sure Ferrari and Mercedes would be very happy if they have the level of porpoising that seemingly the Red Bull guys have got, but even that seemingly was causing issues. As Helmut Marko goes on to say, we do have a good control of the porpoising, but there are still small movements, mainly due to the way the car landed. Again, that's what we believe under high pressure. The fuel line burst, therefore that was kind of the liquid that was leaking out, and well, Max said he could smell some weird fluids, which eventually the engine effectively just failed because of the fuel, which seemingly burst under the high pressure, potentially to do with their porpoising, which kind of strange that the porpoising on the other cars is seemingly much greater, but yet even this small amount had issues with the Red Bull. We believe the main cause of the failure was the damage to the fuel line, going on to say the problems we had in Bahrain were different from the problems we had in Australia, and also different from the problems we had in winter testing. According to Honda, we can count on the problems being solved for the next race. Whether that means increasing how robust everything is or whatever, I don't really know. But they reckon that they can turn this around and be confident, but it's kind of difficult if you're Helmut Marko to say, okay, well, the issues we just had, are different to the ones we had before, and even different to the ones we had before that. So even if we fix these other problems, there's no guarantee that other ones won't come up right. And so difficult times for them, but kind of crazy, right? And maybe the other cars, Mercedes and Ferrari, are thinking, well, hang on a second, if Red Bull are struggling from porpoising and that's causing issues, we probably need to get on top of this very quickly, or it could cause other issues such as burst fuel lines, even though that seems to be a Red Bull exclusive problem, at least so far this year. Speaking of Ferrari real quick, so according to F1 data analysis, they might actually be bringing a new floor to Imola, which will potentially mitigate porpoising. Ferrari seem to have a lot of good stuff in the works, especially given their championship position, given that if they fix the porpoising, they should be even quicker, and they've got more to come from the engine. So, it's going to take a lot for the other teams, I'm sure, to catch up with these guys. But, seemingly they might have a new floor which could mitigate the porpoising. I'm sure, Mercedes are going to keep a close eye on what they do here, because it doesn't seem like Mercedes' new floor that they're certainly going to create at some point to try and deal with the aerodynamics will be coming to this race. But, maybe Ferrari will try something or another. Wanted to mention this actually real quick as well, because of course Oscar Piastri, currently effectively on the bench after winning the F2 championship on the Alpine team. He didn't get a spot this season, didn't get a seat. Now, Ocon reckons, of course, an Alpine driver, he reckons he'll have a seat in F1 very shortly indeed. I'm very sure he, that being Piastri, is going to have a seat in F1 shortly. Don't know where in the paddock, but the opportunity comes for the ones who deserve it, and Oscar is one of them. So great words from him, and also the fact that Alpine are considering loaning him to another team, possibly. As Lauren Rossi says, if it's a solution that allows me to get him back, I might think about it. I'm not opposed to the solution. I want to develop Oscar, don't want to leave him sitting on the bench. So who knows, maybe, if Williams, for example, have an opportunity that opens up for Nicholas Latifi, right? If they have enough funding, I suppose, anyway, then maybe that's a seat that opens up. But always difficult when you're an F2 champion and then you can't go back to F2 because you won it and that's not in the rules, and you're expected to go into F1 and then a seat doesn't arrive for whatever reason. But seemingly they are potentially going to try and make something work. Maybe next season a spot might open up somewhere in the driver grid. This also, just to mention before we close out here, from F1 Stats Guru, thought this was very interesting. Of course, Schumacher and Hamilton both won 7 world titles. These are the titles, and during their title winning years, this is kind of how things look. So of course Hamilton with more races, as the number of races increased over time, 134 to 116 for Schumacher. During those years they won the titles. Hamilton's pole rate is slightly higher, his win rate is actually slightly lower, his podium rate is higher. But interestingly to me is that the retirement rate, of course, of Hamilton is much lower, partly of course because Hamilton, generally a very safe driver, avoids risks where he can, but also because the reliability of the car's got an awful lot better through of course through the 90s, early 2000s into some of the most recent years, most certainly. So the fact that Hamilton only about 4.5% retirements, 6 out of 134 races he competed in, whereas Schumacher was about 13% of races he retired. So if you consider that in 15 out of 116 races he retired and 87 out of 116 he got podiums, that pretty much means that there's very few races at all. Only about 12% of races in Michael Schumacher's entire, kind of title-winning years where he didn't make the podiums. That's kind of crazy. Like at 1 in 10 races where he actually finished the race, he would not be on the podium, which is pretty absurd. Hamilton, in fairness, not all that far behind that. Fastest lap generally to Schumacher, but yeah, just comparing these two guys, certainly pretty good drivers. I think that is relatively safe to say. And of course, on this day last year was Imola 1 year ago. Crazy race, actually. The rain was in full effect. Hamilton made a pretty big mistake, right? He goes off the track, and then I think George Russell, or there was some collision that came behind him that meant the race was red flagged. Then he got to start from the pits again, made his way back up through the field, and ended up finishing just behind Max Verstappen. But yeah, last year, but the big story of the day, I guess, was that it was Lando Norris getting on the podium. So I think Hamilton passed him right towards the end of the race, but last year it was Verstappen, Hamilton, and then Lando Norris on the podium. So whether we'll see more chaos this time around, hopefully that's the case at the very least. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.